They said Alpha Declan Reed was looking for a ruthless queen to help rule his corporate empire. They were wrong. He was searching for a mother for a boy the world had written off. This is the story of a high-stakes deception, a hidden child, and the one Omega who broke every rule. The Silverwood Syndicate was not your fairy tale werewolf pack howling at the moon in some remote forest. In the modern world, power was wielded in glass-paneled boardrooms overlooking the Seattle skyline. Declan Reed, the Alpha of Silverwood, was a man who commanded billions in real estate and shipping, but his most fiercely guarded asset was entirely private: his 6-year-old son, Leo. Leo was not the heir the pack elders expected. In a society that valued physical dominance, predatory instincts, and loud displays of power, Leo was painfully quiet. Diagnosed with level 2 autism spectrum disorder, the boy experienced the world not as a wolf ready to conquer, but as a deeply sensitive soul constantly overwhelmed by a barrage of sensory input. He was nonverbal most days, communicating through a series of hums and gestures, and he possessed an intense, singular fascination with vintage clockwork. Since the death of Declan's first wife in a tragic car accident 3 years prior, the pressure from the pack elders to remarry had reached a boiling point. An alpha without a Luna was considered unstable. An alpha with an imperfect heir was a vulnerability. The elders, led by the draconian beta, Harrison Croft, demanded that Declan host the traditional Luna trials, a modernized, month-long series of social engagements, charity galas, and boardroom evaluations designed to select a mate from the highest-ranking, most genetically superior families across the North American packs. Declan agreed, but on one condition: the trials would be held at his private residence, the sprawling Blackwood estate on Mercer Island. What the elders and the glittering array of candidates didn't know was that the entire spectacle was a ruse. Declan didn't care about their pedigree, their wealth, or their ability to host a charity auction. He had designed a secret, secondary evaluation. He was testing them through Leo. The estate was discreetly wired with state-of-the-art surveillance. Declan instructed the nannies to occasionally lose track of Leo in the West Wing, placing the boy in the direct path of the prospective Lunas when they believed no one of importance was watching. For the first 2 weeks, the results were entirely heartbreaking. Victoria Sterling, a breathtakingly beautiful alpha-born female from the formidable Colorado packs, was the elders' undisputed favorite. She was poised, politically savvy, and smelled of expensive vanilla and ambition. Yet, when she encountered Leo sitting in the hallway lining up his collection of antique gears, her true nature bled through the polished veneer. Declan watched the security feed from his study, his jaw tight. On the black and white screen, Victoria nearly tripped over the boy. She didn't kneel. She didn't soften her voice. Instead, she looked down at him with a mixture of pity and profound disgust. "Where is your handler, little wolf?" she snapped, her tone dripping with impatience. When Leo ignored her, entirely focused on perfectly aligning a brass cog, Victoria scoffed, stepping over him. "Tragic," she muttered to her assistant, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "When I am Luna, we will find a quiet facility for him. The pack cannot be seen as weak." Declan's pen snapped in his hand, ink bleeding across his mahogany desk. He crossed Victoria's name off the list with a violent slash. Candidate after candidate failed. Some ignored Leo entirely, treating him like a piece of the furniture. Others tried to force him into unnatural interactions, grabbing his shoulders and demanding eye contact, which only sent the boy into violent, distress-filled meltdowns. They saw Leo as a broken thing to be fixed, or a shameful secret to be hidden. They did not see a child. As the 3rd week approached, a dark, heavy cynicism settled over Declan. His wolf, usually a source of dominant strength, felt cornered and weary. He was preparing to cancel the remainder of the trials, ready to face the wrath of the elders, when an uninvited variable entered the equation. Sadie Bennett was never supposed to be at the Blackwood estate. She wasn't a high-ranking candidate, nor did she possess the ruthless political backing of a wealthy pack. Sadie was an Omega, but not the submissive, fragile archetype the old stories painted. She was a pragmatic, fiercely intelligent woman who worked as the head archivist for the pack's historical society in downtown Seattle. She had been dispatched to the estate solely to catalog a newly discovered set of 19th-century pack treaties before the grand finale of the Luna trials. Sadie kept her head down. She wore practical wool cardigans, kept her auburn hair tied back in a messy clip, and smelled faintly of old paper, rain, and lavender. She was entirely invisible to the glittering elite parading through the manor. Her first encounter with Leo happened entirely by accident. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the estate staff was in a frenzy preparing for the evening's masquerade. Sadie had retreated to the quietest room in the house, the solarium, to categorize a stack of fragile documents. It was there she found Leo. The boy was backed into a corner behind a large monstera plant, his hands clamped tightly over his ears. He was rocking violently back and forth, emitting a low, distressed keening sound. The vibrations of the heavy bass from the ballroom soundcheck 3 rooms away were rattling the glass panes of the solarium. To a werewolf's heightened senses, it was loud. To an autistic child with a sensory processing disorder, it was absolute agony. Declan, who had been dealing with a crisis call from his shipping logistics team, caught sight of the solarium feed on his monitor. His heart dropped. He slammed the phone down and sprinted toward the door, knowing that a full sensory meltdown for Leo could take hours to de-escalate. But by the time Declan reached the hidden observation corridor that looked into the solarium through a 2-way mirror, he stopped dead in his tracks. Sadie hadn't run to get a nanny. She hadn't panicked. Instead, she had abandoned her priceless historical documents. Declan watched as she slowly lowered herself to the floor, intentionally keeping a respectful distance of about 5 feet from the thrashing boy. She didn't say a word. She knew better than to add her voice to the overwhelming sensory noise. Slowly, deliberately, Sadie took off her heavy, oversized weighted cardigan. She laid it gently on the floor between them, pushing it inches closer to Leo, offering it without demanding he take it. Then, she reached into her satchel and pulled out an old, mechanical metronome she used when restoring antique, water-damaged texts. It helped her keep a steady rhythm. She wound it up and set it on the floor. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The rhythmic, mechanical sound cut through the chaotic bass, vibrating through the walls. It was a precise, predictable frequency. Behind the glass, Declan held his breath. Leo's rocking began to slow. The boy's distressed hums hitched in his throat. Peeking through his fingers, his wide, tear-filled eyes locked onto the swinging pendulum of the metronome. Sadie remained seated, cross-legged, her gaze cast downward, ensuring she wasn't forcing intimidating eye contact. She simply tapped her fingers on her knees in perfect time with the metronome. Tick, tock. Minute by slow minute, the tension bled out of the boy's rigid frame. Leo uncurled from his defensive ball. He reached out with a trembling hand and pulled Sadie's heavy, lavender-scented cardigan into his lap, burying his face in the soft wool. The deep pressure, combined with the rhythmic ticking, grounded him. "It's too loud today, isn't it?" Sadie murmured, her voice a soft, low rumble that didn't vibrate with the commanding alpha tones Leo was used to hearing. "My younger brother used to hate the noise, too. The bass feels like bees buzzing in your chest. You're safe here. We can just sit." Leo didn't speak, but he slowly shuffled forward until he was sitting mere inches from Sadie. He picked up the metronome, fascinated by the exposed gears in the back. Sadie simply smiled, pulling out a blank notebook and a pencil, and began to sketch the gears alongside him. Behind the 2-way mirror, Declan's chest heaved. A profound, overwhelming warmth flooded his veins, startling his inner wolf. He had spent weeks watching the most perfect women in the werewolf hierarchy fail his son with spectacular cruelty. Yet here was an Omega, a mere archivist, who had managed to calm his son in less than 10 minutes with nothing but a sweater, a metronome, and radical empathy. She saw him, Declan realized, his hands pressing against the cool glass. She actually saw him. That evening, the masquerade gala was a dazzling display of wealth and arrogance. Victoria Sterling held court in the center of the ballroom, laughing at a joke made by Elder Croft, practically wearing the invisible crown of the future Luna. Declan stood on the sweeping mahogany staircase, looking down at the crowd. His eyes bypassed the glittering jewels and the expensive silk. Instead, his gaze pierced through the crowd, searching the shadows near the back of the room. There, standing quietly near the exit doors, was Sadie. She was wearing a simple, understated navy dress, holding a clipboard, ensuring the historical artifacts on display were not touched by the drunk guests. Declan descended the stairs. The crowd parted for him instantly, a sea of predatory wolves making way for their alpha. Victoria's smile widened as she stepped forward, expecting him to ask her for the first formal dance, the traditional sign of his final choice. "Declan," Victoria purred, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "The music is just starting." Declan didn't even break his stride. He walked right past Victoria's extended hand, the silence in the ballroom dropping to a sudden, deafening hush. The murmurs of the high society died in their throats as the billionaire Alpha crossed the entire length of the ballroom, stopping only when he reached the bewildered archivist. Sadie looked up, her eyes wide with shock as the towering Alpha stopped in front of her. "Miss Bennett," Declan said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. He offered his hand. "I believe you owe me a dance." The silence in the Blackwood ballroom was absolute, thick enough to choke on. The synchronized ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner was the only sound as Declan's hand remained extended toward Sadie. Sadie stared at his palm, calloused and massive, then shifted her gaze up to his piercing amber eyes. She could feel the collective weight of 100 predators staring at her, their sense spiking with confusion, outrage, and jealousy. Victoria Sterling's aura, previously smelling of sweet vanilla, had curdled into the sharp, bitter tang of burnt ozone and fury. "Mr. Reed," Sadie whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "I am staff. I'm an archivist. This is highly inappropriate." "Sadie," Declan replied, his voice a low, steady rumble meant only for her. "If you do not take my hand, I am going to have to stand here until the end of time, and my beta looks like he is about to have a stress-induced aneurysm. Please." A tiny, reluctant smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. She placed her hand in his. The moment their skin connected, a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity shot up Sadie's arm. It wasn't the magical, fated mate spark of fairy tales. It was the raw, undeniable chemistry of two adults recognizing a profound shift in their reality. Declan pulled her seamlessly onto the dance floor. He gestured sharply to the string quartet, who frantically scrambled to begin playing a sweeping waltz. As they moved, Declan kept a protective barrier between Sadie and the glaring crowd. "You are wondering why I am ruining your quiet evening," he said, guiding her with surprising grace for a man of his size. "The thought had crossed my mind," she murmured, keeping her eyes on his lapel. "I assume it has something to do with the solarium." Declan's grip tightened infinitesimally on her waist. "I saw everything, Sadie. I saw how you handled Leo. I have watched the most powerful women in North America look at my son as if he were a defective piece of property. And then you, a woman who had no reason to care, gave up your coat and your silence to bring him peace." Sadie looked up, her expression hardening. "He is a child, Alpha, not a political pawn. Anyone with a shred of basic human decency would have done the same." "You are wrong," Declan said, his tone laced with a heavy, bitter reality. "In our world, decency is often the first casualty of ambition. Where did you learn to do that?" The metronome, the spacing. Sadie looked away, the music swelling around them. "Before I became an archivist, I worked in special education in Portland. My younger brother, Caleb, he was severely autistic. He was nonverbal, just like Leo. The world was too loud for him, too bright, too fast. We lost him to a grand mal seizure when he was 14. She swallowed hard, blinking back the sudden sting of tears. When I saw Leo covering his ears, I didn't see an Alpha's air. I just saw a boy who needed the world to slow down for a minute." Declan stopped dancing. Right there in the middle of the floor, he looked at her with a reverence that made Sadie's breath hitch. He didn't see an Omega. He saw a survivor, a protector. Their moment was abruptly shattered by the arrival of Beta Harrison Croft. The older man practically vibrated with indignation. "Alpha," Harrison hissed, stepping onto the dance floor. "A word, now, in private." Declan's eyes flashed a dangerous, primal gold. "Whatever you have to say, Harrison, you can say it here." "You are making a mockery of the syndicate," Harrison snapped, keeping his voice low but venomous. "You bypassed the Sterling heiress for a bookkeeper? The Colorado Pax will take this as a grave insult. The Sterling merger is worth billions in untouched territory. If the Sterling Pax loyalty is contingent on me marrying a woman who steps over my son like garbage, then the merger is dead," Declan growled, his voice vibrating with alpha command. "The trials are over, Harrison." Victoria Sterling had not stayed to watch her humiliation unfold. By the time the waltz ended, she was already in her suite, smashing a crystal decanter against the brick fireplace. She was not a woman who accepted defeat. To be rejected was one thing. To be cast aside for a low-ranking Omega was a strike against her very bloodline. She picked up her phone and dialed her head of security, Richard Hayes. "I want everything on the archivist." Sadie Bennett. "Dig into her finances, her history, her family. Nobody is that perfect. I want her removed from this estate, and I want it done before the elders' final vote on Friday." Over the next 3 days, the atmosphere at Blackwood Estate was suffocating. Declan had moved Sadie out of the staff quarters and placed her in a guest suite in the main house, under his direct protection. He spent his afternoons sitting on the floor of Leo's playroom with Sadie, learning how she communicated with his son. She taught Declan that Leo wasn't ignoring him. He was processing. She showed him how to use picture cards, and how deep pressure therapy, like rolling a heavy therapy ball over Leo's back, could reset his nervous system. For the first time in his life, Declan heard his son laugh, a breathless, joyful sound that brought the billionaire to his knees in tears. But outside those walls, Victoria was laying a trap. Richard Hayes had discovered Sadie's past in Portland, but Victoria twisted the narrative. On Thursday afternoon, during an informal garden luncheon with the elders, Victoria struck. She cornered Sadie near the rose trellises, surrounded by a court of giggling, high-ranking females. "Miss Bennett," Victoria said loudly, ensuring the nearby elders, including Harrison, could hear. "I was so moved by your connection with little Leo. It made me look into your background. Portland, wasn't it?" Sadie clutched her clipboard, sensing the ambush. "Yes." Victoria feigned sympathy, placing a hand to her chest. "Such a tragic story about your brother. But what the elders might find interesting is the substantial medical debt your family accumulated before he passed. Hundreds of thousands in hospital bills. And suddenly, you find yourself alone with a billionaire's vulnerable son, playing the savior." The whispers ignited instantly. "Are you implying something, Miss Sterling?" Sadie asked, her voice dangerously calm. "I'm just saying it's quite a coincidence," Victoria sneered. "An omega, drowning in debt, suddenly seduces an alpha by manipulating his defective child. It's a classic grift. You don't care about the boy. You care about the vault." Sadie didn't shrink back. She stepped directly into Victoria's space, forcing the taller woman to look down. "You view power as dominance, Victoria. You think baring your teeth and throwing money around makes you strong. But true strength is endurance. It's sitting in the dark with a terrified child for 3 hours until he feels safe. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in my world." Victoria's eyes narrowed into slits. "We'll see about that. Tomorrow is the foundation gala. The press will be there. Let's see how your little experiment holds up under the bright lights." The Silverwood Foundation Gala was the social event of the year, held at the downtown Seattle Syndicate headquarters. It was a massive PR event meant to show the human world the philanthropic side of Declan's empire. Traditionally, the Alpha's heir made a brief 5-minute appearance for the press photos. Declan had fiercely debated bringing Leo, but Sadie had devised a plan: noise-canceling headphones disguised under a stylish beanie, and a strict no-flash photography rule for the press pool. What they didn't know was that Victoria had paid off the lead audio technician, a man named Greg, and tipped off a ruthless tabloid photographer known for aggressive flash photography. The moment Declan, Sadie, and Leo stepped onto the red carpet in the grand foyer, the trap sprang. Instead of the agreed-upon soft classical background music, the PA system suddenly shrieked with high-frequency feedback, a piercing metallic squeal that felt like ice picks in a werewolf's ears. Simultaneously, a barrage of blinding, strobe-like camera flashes erupted from the press pit. It was an assault. Leo dropped to his knees instantly, tearing off his beanie and headphones, screaming. It wasn't a cry of fear. It was a shriek of absolute, unfiltered neurological agony. He began to hit the sides of his head violently with his fists, trying to knock the sensory pain out of his skull. The crowd gasped. The elders watched in horror. Victoria stood on the balcony, a smug, vindicated smile playing on her lips. "See?" her expression said. "The boy is broken." Declan lunged forward, his wolf roaring to the surface, ready to tear the photographers apart. But Sadie was faster. She didn't freeze. She threw herself onto the plush red carpet, sliding on her knees until she reached Leo. She pulled off her heavy velvet evening coat and threw it entirely over the boy, plunging him into darkness. Then, she wrapped her own body over the coat, creating a physical human shield against the lights and the noise. She pressed her hands gently over his, stopping him from striking himself, and began to hum a deep, resonant, vibrating tone directly against his chest. She took the blinding flashes. She took the chaotic noise. She absorbed it all so he wouldn't have to. Declan roared, a terrifying, earth-shaking sound that shattered 2 of the glass chandeliers. "Cut the power!" he bellowed. "Cut it now!" Security scrambled. The lights went dead, and the horrific feedback loop screeched to a halt. In the sudden, dim quiet of the foyer, the only sound was Sadie's steady, rhythmic humming, and the slowing, ragged breaths of the little boy hidden beneath her coat. Declan knelt beside them, his hands shaking. Sadie looked up at him from the floor, her makeup ruined, her evening gown torn at the knee, but her eyes were fierce, burning with protective fire. "He's okay," she whispered, stroking Leo's hair under the coat. "We've got him." The next morning, the atmosphere in the glass-walled executive boardroom on the 40th floor was lethal. The 12-pack elders sat around the long oak table. Harrison Croft sat at the head, looking grim. Victoria sat to his right, perfectly poised, a leather binder of merger documents in front of her. Declan stood at the window, looking out over the rain-slicked Seattle skyline. He had spent the entire night holding Sadie and Leo as the boy recovered from the sensory hangover. "Alpha," Harrison began, clearing his throat. "Last night was unfortunate. A public relations disaster. It proves what we have feared. The boy cannot represent the pack. We must institutionalize him in a specialized facility, for his own good. And you must announce your mating to Victoria today to stabilize the syndicate's stock." Declan turned around. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying calm. He walked to the head of the table, picked up a remote control, and pressed a button. The wall-sized monitor behind him flickered to life. It didn't show financial projections. It showed the security footage from the Blackwood hallway 3 weeks ago. The room watched in stunned silence as Victoria Sterling stepped over Leo, sneering at him in disgust, calling him tragic and planning to lock him away. Victoria's face drained of color. That is an invasion of privacy. I was speaking in confidence." Declan ignored her, pressing the button again. The screen shifted to a digital money trail. "This," Declan said, his voice deadly quiet, "is a wire transfer of $50,000 from an offshore account linked to Sterling Industries. It was paid yesterday morning to Gregory Vance, our lead audio technician. The same technician who spiked the audio feed and caused my son's public torture." The boardroom erupted into chaos. Elders leaped to their feet, shouting in shock. To attack an Alpha's pup, even indirectly, was treason of the highest order. Harrison Croft looked at the documents, his face pale. He looked at Victoria, who was now trembling, her arrogant facade entirely shattered. "You orchestrated an attack on a child," Declan said, walking slowly toward Victoria. The predator in him was fully dominant now, his presence suffocating the room. "You thought you could break him to prove a point. You thought true power was crushing the weak." Declan slammed his hands on the table, making Victoria flinch violently. "You are stripped of your candidate status. The Sterling merger is dead, and if you or anyone from your pack ever comes within 100 miles of my city again, I will not see you in a boardroom. I will see you in the woods." He turned his blazing eyes on the elders, including Harrison. "And let me be perfectly clear, my son is not broken. He does not need fixing. He needs a pack that is strong enough to adapt to him, rather than forcing him to adapt to a world that causes him pain. If any of you doubt his place as my heir, you can leave your resignations on my desk." No one spoke, no one breathed. The absolute authority of the Alpha was uncontested. Declan left the boardroom, leaving the ruined Victoria and the stunned elders behind. He didn't go to his office. He took the private elevator straight down to the underground garage and drove to Capitol Hill. Sadie was sitting on the floor of her modest, plant-filled apartment, organizing some files, when the knock came. She opened the door to find the billionaire Alpha standing in her hallway, looking completely exhausted, stripped of all his corporate armor. "Are you fired?" she asked, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. Declan let out a breath that sounded like a laugh. "I think I just fired half the North American werewolf elite." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The air shifted, heavy with the reality of what came next. He didn't drop to one knee. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a partnership forged in fire and quiet understanding. He took her hands in his. "I don't need a ruthless queen, Sadie," Declan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I need a partner who understands that the strongest thing a person can do is be gentle. I need the woman who sat on the floor with my son when the rest of the world walked by. Will you be my Luna? Will you be his mother?" Sadie looked at the man who commanded empires, seeing only a father desperately trying to build a safe world for his child. She stepped into his arms, burying her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of rain, cedar, and home. "I already am," she whispered. 6 months later, the Blackwood estate was fundamentally changed. The sterile, echoing halls were softened with acoustic paneling. The bright, harsh chandeliers were replaced with dimmable, warm lighting. In the solarium, sitting on a plush rug, was Leo. He was carefully assembling a complex, custom-built clockwork train set. Across from him sat Sadie, holding the blueprints, occasionally passing him a gear. The doors opened, and Declan walked in, loosening his tie after a long day of board meetings. He didn't command attention. He simply sat down on the floor next to them. Leo didn't look up, but as Declan settled, the boy reached out, picked up a small, polished brass gear, and placed it perfectly into his father's open palm. It was his way of saying, "I know you are here. I am glad you are here." Declan closed his hand over the gear, looking over his son's head to meet Sadie's eyes. She smiled, tapping a rhythm on her knee. Tick. Tock. They hadn't just survived the trials. They had rewritten the rules, proving that the heart of a pack wasn't found in its fangs, but in the quiet, enduring beat of its love. True strength is rarely found in loud dominance or the baring of fangs. It resides in patience, empathy, and the quiet endurance to understand what others dismiss. Declan and Sadie's journey proves that the most profound bonds aren't forged by conforming to societal expectations, but by fiercely protecting the vulnerable. In a world obsessed with perfection, embracing our authentic, unfiltered reality is the greatest triumph of all.